John Muir once said, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul alike." Hello, everyone. My name is Cory. I'm the lead naturalist for the Yosemite Conservancy. We provide visitor programs along with fund research, restoration, and other park projects. And I'm coming to you today from Tunnel View here in Yosemite National Park, a place that's usually just packed with people on a beautiful spring day like today. Languages spoken from all over the world, smiling faces emerging from their vehicles, some of them to see Yosemite for the very first time. And this is a place I often come to heal, but I actually don't come for the view, I come for the people. I come here and I love to just sit and listen to people experience Yosemite for the first time or for the 100th time, emerge from their vehicles or their tour buses and watch their faces just absolutely light up at this spectacular view of Yosemite National Park. And as you can see, Yosemite's putting on quite a show today. If you look over towards Bridal Veil, we can see a beautiful rainbow on Bridal Veil right now, sort of letting us know that everything's going to be okay and that Yosemite's going to be here for us after this is all over. And I thought today that since I couldn't come here to see you and see your reactions to Yosemite, I would bring Yosemite to you at home and maybe provide a little bit of healing for you and share with you some of the stories of Yosemite and how Yosemite has helped heal people in the past. One of the first stories I think of when I think about the healing power of Yosemite is the story of Galen Clark. Galen Clark was the very first guardian of Yosemite, but his story begins in the eastern United States, where he tried to be a furniture maker in New York, tried other business endeavors in New England, and eventually, like so many others, heard about the gold rush here in California, and he ventured out west to try to strike it rich. He never did find gold. He eventually found his way to Mariposa, just outside here of Yosemite. And it was there that he took on odd jobs to try to make ends meet, try to provide for himself and his family. And he eventually in Mariposa heard stories of this beautiful valley that had recently been discovered by Euro-Americans. And so he joined an early tourist party and ventured through the mountains here into this beautiful valley. He actually just came across a trail right up behind us here, and that's where he got his very first glimpse of this valley. And I think about Galen, how he must have felt coming here and seeing Yosemite without seeing any images of it beforehand. His jaw must have just hit the ground. I think about that when I see other visitors coming here to Tunnel View and coming and seeing this valley for the very first time. Watching their jaws hit the ground, watching them just fall head over heels in love with this place. And Galen felt the power of this place. He just fell head over heels in love with it, went back into the town of Mariposa, and it was there that he then came down with a terrible cough. And he went to visit the doctors, and the doctors diagnosed him with what at the time they called consumption, what we would call TB today. And they gave him a 50-50 chance of either living or dying. And so Galen decided that he would move into the mountains to breathe in the fresh mountain air to try to cure himself of TB. And so he moved into the southern portion of what is now Yosemite, into the Wawona area, and he built a small cabin there. He started taking long walks out in the woods, breathing in the fresh mountain air. He would actually take walks without wearing a hat or shoes because it said that it increased his circulation, therefore increasing his chances of survival. And it was on one of those walks that he stumbled upon the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. He was actually one of the very early Euro-Americans to lay eyes on that grove of trees. And he just was in awe of these huge trees. He'd never seen anything like them. And so he started, hosting early tourists through the grove, showing the beauty of these trees, built a small hotel to host early tourists. And in those early years, in the 1860s, Galen Clark and other concerned citizens were also writing letters to Congress and to the government explaining the beauty of this area and how this area maybe needed to be protected. And so Galen's letters, along with many others, eventually reached the eyes and the ears of Abraham Lincoln. And on June 30th, 1864, Abraham Lincoln sets aside time from the Civil War to sign the Yosemite Grant. And this is a pretty monumental piece of legislation. This was the very first time in the history, not just of the United States, but the history of the world, that land had been set aside by a government essentially just because it's pretty, for no other reason. And, we'd had lands that were set aside previous to Yosemite. Hot Springs, Arkansas, for example, was set aside in the 1830s, but it was set aside for medicinal purposes. There was land in Poland set aside in the 1400s, but set aside for hunting purposes. Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias were set aside in 1864, as stated in the grant, to preserve and protect their scenic beauty. The idea of the national parks throughout the world, it started right here in Yosemite, and it started with people like Galen Clark and others venturing here and feeling the power of this place, understanding that this place needs to be preserved and protected for everyone and for all time. And after the passing of the Yosemite Grant in 1864, Galen Clark was appointed as the very first guardian of Yosemite, what we consider to be maybe the superintendent of today or the chief ranger of today. And Galen Clark cared and protected for these lands in those early years. He would chase out sheep herders and poachers. He would, help maintain trails. He would provide information for early visitors. And Galen Clark obviously lived a little bit longer. Actually, in his 70s, Galen Clark came down into Yosemite Valley and he dug his own grave here because he didn't want to burden anybody else with the task of digging his grave. So he dug his own grave. He planted sequoias around it. He even dug a shallow well so he could water those sequoias until he passed. Galen Clark actually lived all the way until he was 2 weeks shy of his 96th birthday. And I think his story is really a testament to the healing power of this place. Not only was it the fresh mountain air that helped cure him of his disease, but it was also the healing power of Yosemite. It was, in a way, a place that Galen Clark found purpose. He found a place that he could succeed, a job that he loved, and something where he could express his passion for this place. Another one of my favorite stories here in Yosemite is the story of Stephen Mather, the very first director of our national parks. Stephen Mather was a self-made millionaire. He made his millions in the borax industry. In fact, if you've ever heard the phrase 20 mule team borax, Mather came up with that phrase. So marketing genius, right? Still used today. But Mather was also a lover of the outdoors. He would often take long excursions out into the mountains, especially in the Sierra. And he would often take these excursions actually to cure himself of depression. Mather suffered severely of depression. And on one of his excursions in 1914, he ventured into Yosemite Valley, and he noticed that the trails were in dire need of repair. He noticed that there was livestock grazing in the meadows. And so when he went back home, he wrote this angry letter to Franklin Lane, the Secretary of the Interior at the time. And he explained to Lane how he felt the national parks were being mismanaged and how he felt we needed maybe an agency in Washington to run the national parks. And so Lane writes him this letter back and he says, well, Stephen, if you think you can do it, why don't you come down to Washington and run them yourself? And he does. He goes to Washington, and in 1916, the National Park Service was established with Stephen Mather as the very first director of the national parks. And Stephen Mather poured not only his heart into the national parks, but also his own wealth. In fact, here in Yosemite, half the eastern entrance to the park, the Tioga Road, was purchased out of the pocket of Stephen Mather and gifted to the national parks. Ranger Club, early ranger housing, which which is actually today now a National Historic Landmark and still houses rangers. The construction of Ranger Club was funded out of the pocket of Stephen Mather, gifted to the national parks. Stephen Mather had a deep love for the outdoors and understood the healing power of wild places. Mather was also, as I said, suffered severely from depression. In fact, he was institutionalized 2 separate times in his life. And I find it beautiful that the 2 times that he was institutionalized, he was only allowed to bring 2 personal items. And the items that he chose were pictures of Yosemite. Yosemite provided him that healing in those times that he needed. He also understood the power of just going out and taking a walk in the woods, how it can brighten your mood, especially a walk here in Yosemite. Another story I think of is the story of Ansel Adams. In fact, in 1918, during the Spanish flu pandemic, Ansel Adams contracted the Spanish flu and was bedridden for 2 weeks. And it was then that he said he read a book about lepers, and at the time he became sort of compulsive. Anytime he would touch anything, he had to wash his hands immediately. He was washing his hands maybe hundreds of times a day. And it was also during that time that he begged his parents to take him back to this place that he had visited, Yosemite. And he eventually, after pestering his parents over and over, they eventually agreed. They drove him into Yosemite, and he got to visit that place that he loved so much, that place that provided him with so much healing. And as the story goes, it said that visit to Yosemite is what cured Ansel of his compulsions and maybe helped him heal from his disease. Yosemite and wild places in general can provide us healing in desperate times. People have practiced the healing power of nature for years. In Japan, they practice a form of what is called forest bathing, or shinrin-yoku, taking walks out in the woods, helping heal yourself. Science backs up the healing power of nature. Studies have shown a 40-minute walk in nature will lower cortisol levels, therefore lowering blood pressure. There are aromatic properties to nature when you breathe in, lower stress levels. So I want to encourage you at this time, if you can, go out and take a walk out in the woods. Breathe in that fresh mountain air. Even if you can't get out, if you're, sheltering in place in an apartment, just put down the iPads, put down the phones, turn off Tiger King, and just look out the window. Look for the spring birds that are coming back. Listen to their songs. It can provide us with that healing that we so desperately need. And when this is all over, Yosemite's going to be here. We miss you. We can't wait for you to come back. We can't wait for you to come back to your national park and experience this healing power that has, helped so many people throughout its history. So I'll leave you today with one last John Muir quote, and this is one of my favorites. It's one you might be familiar with, but this is actually the full quote. So I'll leave you with this today. Walk away quietly in any direction and taste the freedom of the mountaineer. Camp out among the grasses and the gentians of glacial meadows and craggy gardens, nature's darlings. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into the trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves. As age comes on, one source of enjoyment after another is closed, but nature's sources never fail. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.